speaking of Texas being back, let's go through some of these power rankings. Joe, your top 10 in week 8, how do you have it listed?
Number 1, I've got Oregon. Number 2, Ohio State. Number 3, Texas. Number 4, Georgia. Number 5, actually, I kind of already hate that. No, I should have put Georgia ahead of Texas. Number 5, Miami. Number 6, Penn State. Number 7, Clemson. Number 8, Alabama. Number 9, Iowa State. And number 10, LSU. The reason why I brought up the Georgia-Texas thing, because, I'm picking Georgia to win. Now that I'm thinking about that, I should have put Georgia ahead of Texas. That's a mistake on my part.
Yeah, I don't think, Joe, and we talk about this every week, I don't think you should have done that because you're going based off of what you've seen through 8 weeks, not what's going to happen in week 8, what you've seen.
Well, but the decision is based on who I think wins at a neutral site. That's what goes into all this. That's how I crafted it this week now that we have enough evidence. I would say that if they squared off with one another, I would pick Georgia to beat Texas.
Well, you're going to do that a little bit later. Just to give you mine here, not a lot changes, Joe, other than maybe the first couple of 3 here for us. But Texas at number 1 for me, Oregon 2, Ohio State 3, Georgia 4, Miami 5, Alabama 6, Penn State 7, Clemson at number 8. I want to continue to keep eyes on Clemson, Joe. They're now the leader on BetOnline to be the ACC champion. Number 9, LSU, and number 10, Texas A&M. I've got to start off with yours very quickly, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So I think that there's a lot of teams out there. And I love the Iowa State hype. I love the Iowa State team. I love it. However, I just don't think on a neutral field they can beat Ole Miss. Like, I don't think that they can beat Texas A&M. Joe, if A&M and Iowa State lined up today, I know that you're taking A&M. Like, and so the part that I'm trying to make here, I'm with you on having them on the fringe. Maybe some teams lose out here, get their second loss. Iowa State started getting in here. But I cannot, for the life of me, Joe, A&M's a better football team than Iowa State.
I see. My problem is that it's being deemed like a foregone conclusion. I don't think that's the case. I think that what we've seen so far, yes, the Big 12 and the schedule that Iowa State has faced is obviously lighter than some of these SEC schedules, but there are plenty of deficiencies for a number of these SEC teams that you're bringing up. I don't see balanced teams. I see a balanced Iowa State team. I think that they could fight for 4 quarters and pull out a win over any of those teams. Do I think it's a slam dunk sure thing? No. I think that there is a jumble of teams that could fit in that 9-10 spot. We could probably name off 5 teams that would be in that conversation. But I don't think it's fair to say that Iowa State doesn't deserve to be in that convo. They have been consistent throwing the football. Rocco Beck has been a very efficient passer. We're going to talk about this in the preview. They've been running the ball effectively, and their defense is super underrated. They've been a hair banged up, but their linebackers, their defensive tackles, their edge rushers, they've got a really good front seven. I would argue that because of how well built that they are, that they could handle their own if they played against one of these SEC teams that has had
handle their own and winning are 2 completely different things, though.
I think it applies to the conversation because you're kind of implying that they wouldn't be able to hold their own.
Here's where I would look at it, okay? I think defensively, you're right. They've been a lot better than I think in the preseason when we talked about them and we broke them down in our preview. I don't think that they've seen a defense or offensive line that's been that physical, and I think it could get ugly. Like, I mean, Joe,
Iowa, you don't think that Iowa's offensive line is physical?
Both, but I said offense and defensive line. And be honest with you.
And their defensive line is
and to
physical.
be honest with you, Iowa is not saying the same defensively, especially in their secondary. Joe, they're in the top 75, where they're normally in the top 10 in passing yards allowed. I like Rocco Beck. Look, I like Iowa State. I don't want to come out here and poo-poo on them. They're a great story. They're in the mix of winning the Big 12. But I would have Notre Dame, Tennessee, LSU, and A&M ahead of them if I had to pick. And 2 of those are in mine. I just cannot see a world like Joe. You mean to tell me right now that you had a game in Council Bluffs, well, let me back up, not putting it in Iowa. You got a game in Orlando, Florida, and you're not putting Tennessee and Iowa State, and you're not taking Tennessee? I don't believe you.
Because I think a lot of the yeah, I mean, you should believe me. A lot of the issues that we've seen those teams have to this point, like Tennessee's a perfect example. Their Play calling hasn't been good, and Nico has been off with his accuracy. So there's no reason for me to buy in on that. LSU, they're turning the ball over a ton. They're making a lot of mistakes. They're not turning to their run game when they should be. I think that could hurt them in this matchup. Texas A&M is the one that I think has the best argument that I was seriously debating putting in there.
Well, because they beat down on a top 10 opponent.
Well, they did, but the weeks prior to that, and I know that they were without Connor Weigman, and they were trying to figure out the direction that they were going in, but they have a couple of dud week performances on their schedule that they haven't played well, especially the Bowling Green game. So like I just think that this Iowa State team is underappreciated. And I think teams that are playing balanced, good football deserve recognition. It's not like I'm trying to make the case for a one-loss Iowa State team. I'm trying to make the case here for an undefeated Iowa State team that has, I would argue, dominated their way through their schedule. The only close game that they have this year is against Iowa. And that's a tough out. That's a tough opponent on the road in a tough place to win.
Joe, just so that we're understanding here, okay? You're putting them right below the category of Alabama in your power rankings. I get Bama's had some massive struggles, right? And I get that. But it's a little too rich for me because I don't think that they can compete on both lines of scrimmage. I don't. I think their O-line has been good enough. But, Joe, again, we're saying A&M do this against SEC opponents, right? Like run the ball at will. They're winning games without their starting quarterback, as you alluded to.
But we got to just ignore the Bowling Green game? Like, they played like ass against Bowling Green.
Okay, that's fair. But we also saw a team that's borderline top 10 lose. I'm going to keep throwing that out there. But, Joe, we saw LSU struggle against two inferior opponents. We've seen Miami go on the road and at home almost lose to inferior opponents. Clemson got beat down there in our top 10. I get that, but it just comes to a part where, man, I cannot put them there yet. Where they ultimately get there, if they continue to win, yes. Right now, I'm out on putting them in a top 10 kind of conversation.
I think that you're underestimating their line play. They have the best line play in the conference.
With a name like Rocco, I'm sure he's got an Italian mother, and God bless her. She probably cooks fantastic. With a name like Rocco at quarterback, I want to have you in there. I just can't do it. So, all right, let's move on. What are some other teams that we want to get to here? Where do you want to start off at?
Let's pull up yours really I don't want to waste any energy talking about LSU for me.
No.
As I said earlier, I kind of just felt obligated to put them in there because there's no right answer in those last two spots. There really isn't. And I don't think that LSU right now is a complete team. I don't think that they're playing sound enough football to like firmly say they're the 9th team on here. The argument can be made for a number of other teams to be placed in there. Those are my thoughts on LSU.
Would they have a common opponent that has gone toe-to-toe with multiple teams inside that top 10? Bama and LSU have a common opponent. They're just coming off a top 10 win against Ole Miss, and that team defense. Look, I think they're in a dogfight this weekend. Here's what I'm going to tell you. You're not going to agree with me, but if they go on the road in that place I think if they handle themselves these next 3 weeks before they go into bye in Bama, they'll be justified. But I understand what you're saying. I think it's going to take more than one game for you to feel like you've justified that pick. So yeah. You want to get to Texas? Because I know that there's been a lot of questions about Texas. I have them at 1. You have them at 3.
I'm surprised you put them at 1, if I'm being completely honest. I would have thought that – look, I'm going to just get to the Oregon side of this thing. I don't know how you can't see what Oregon did last week and not feel pretty good about their performance. They have shown the most to me out of any program that we've watched to this point. The way that they played against Ohio State is replicable, and if they play that way – against Texas, if they play that way against Georgia, against Alabama, they will win those football games. Their performance on both lines of scrimmage, which is an important conversation for all of this stuff, and the way that they are able to create offensively to generate big defensive stops when they needed to, I think that this team is tremendous. I don't think that they stay at that number 1 spot. I think that they're going to end up moving when they lose to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, but I feel the most secure about them at the current moment over Texas.
Joe, how good is Ohio State? And have we made that determination yet? Because
I put them in number 2. I think that the Ohio State team is equally as good. They just got beat.
All right, this is what I'm not going to do, and I'm not going to fight over some small semantics on it, okay? Because I think that you're right in reference to Oregon and Ohio State. I think one team had to lose, and it was what it was. The home team got the advantage. Joe, I'm willing to be wrong about Texas. I do have Georgia winning this week, but man, they kind of dominated. You know what I mean? I mean, like they dominated a top 25 opponent last week.
I'm surprised you're turning heel to the Texas fans.
I'm not turning heel to the. I'm going based off of what's happened the first 7 weeks and the first 7 games that we've seen them play. Now, I'm going to. I will say this. I'm standing on my feet here. I'm picking Georgia to win, but I'm going based off of what I've seen the first 7 weeks, and based off of they have a really good offensive line that could be dominant. A really good defensive line that really could be dominant. They have 6 weapons at receiver that could be really good. I don't trust them at quarterback. That's been my main issue.
You're saying, I don't mean to cut you off, but like, there's one key word that comes into this. You're saying could. Like, I don't think could should be applied for a team that's number 1 in a power ranking. That's where I feel uneasy, and that's why I think that they deserve to be at 3 or 4 until they beat Georgia, and we know that there's legitimate. Because how many times have we seen this in the history of college football, where teams they blow through the start of their schedule, and we think that they're so good, and then they finally face a top opponent, and none of that stuff translates, and then they lose. I'm not saying that Texas is bad and that they're overrated. I just feel uneasy claiming that they're this number 1 best team when they have beaten up on some pretty bad opponents.
They have, man. They have. But I've also seen, I mean, look, I'm not going to try to justify this. Michigan's not a good football team, not to the standards that we hold them to. They were in a dogfight with a USC team that had dogfights with Penn State, had a dogfight with Michigan, had a dogfight with LSU. They went 1-2 in them, right? Like, I mean, they beat a Michigan team that still had what we thought was a top 10 win. It's not now, and I get that, but I'm not saying Ohio State's falling out of the top 10 by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just not. I mean, I had them at 2 last week. I mean, I'm trying to be as consistent as I can. I'm not going to move them back when I had Oregon. I mean, Joe, last week I had Oregon at 6. Man, I moved them up 4 spots. I mean, I get what you're saying. I mean, 7 spots to be moved here. I mean, and if we're going to talk about Oregon, Joe, you're a missed field goal away from losing to Boise State. Like the Idaho game still does exist.
Wait, hold on. How come you made an excuse for Texas A&M earlier, and then now all of a sudden it's an issue for Boise State's going to go to the playoff.
Context has to matter here. You're in a year one head coach with A&M. Their standard and what their situation is different than Oregon and Dan Lanning in year 3 or year 4, whatever it is.
But the context of going up against the best player in the country and eking out that win is different than barely beating
Ashton Jeanty is not the best player in the country. I'm sorry.
Yes, he is.
No, he's not.
Yes, he is. Who's better than him?
Oh, I can name probably 4.
Not 4. I would argue Travis Hunter would be 1.
Travis Hunter is overall a better player than him.
Obviously, he plays both sides.
Yeah. I mean, are you not going to – if one of these quarterbacks start emerging, you're going to put one of those quarterbacks in there? Yes, you will.
It's been 6 weeks. I'm not going to do that.
I got to be real with you.
All right, it's been 8. We're up to 8 weeks.
Hold on. Stop. Dylan Gabriel did something that Ashton Jeanty couldn't.
I'm not putting Dylan – I would never put Dylan Gabriel ahead of Ashton Jeanty. Ashton Jeanty has single-handedly carried them this whole run. This is an average Boise State team that he is carrying them.
Dylan Gabriel beat him.
Okay, that math ain't mathin' right there. A quarterback beating a running back. That math ain't mathin'.
Ashton Jeanty's not the best player in the country.
If you didn't play that game, Boise State loses by 30.
Okay. So look, I'm not going to fight over semantics. Who you want to put at 1, 2, and 3? You know, I mean, look, fair. I'm just not going to do it. Like I can argue here. I think everybody's got arguments. The only team that we didn't talk about in here is Ohio State, really. I mean,
Well, okay.
to be honest with you, Ohio.
Yeah.
If we're going to be real, let's just be real for just a moment. Does Ohio State deserve to be over Georgia and Miami? Because the only tough opponent that they faced, they lost to.
Well, they lost to them by. Okay, look,
I get it.
I think that for a circumstance like this, and our good friend Josh Pate, who put out his JP poll, took a lot of heat for putting them at number one,
I
which
saw
was
that.
pretty funny. I'm not gonna go that far, but they still are a very, very good football team. Arguably, still the
agree.
best team in the country. That got beat. That got beat on the road. That's all that happened, and that came into that. I think that they're more well-rounded than any team in the country. Sometimes those teams lose. Teams aren't always going to be perfect. I just like I don't want to bail on them because of one game. I think it's overly reactionary to do that.
Yeah, fair. Again, we're fighting over semantics on
Right.
who should be 1, 2, and 3.
We talk about Penn State. I think that.
Yeah, I
that's
was going to get to them next. You know,
Okay.
Joe, a team that's been in our power rankings the last 3 or 4 weeks here has been Penn State, and we hadn't talked about them once. They go out to USC and an overtime win. You have them at 6. I have them at 7. Look, man, I think Penn State, for what it's worth, they have overcome some challenges. You know, I think that they're not a complete team, right? Like, I don't think that they're a complete team yet. They're finding ways to win tough football games. And, Joe, they're one of the only pair of teams that have faced better competition. Now, they haven't faced a premier opponent in reference to, like, one of the big dogs, but they beat down on USC in overtime. Tyler Warren has, 17 catches in that game?
Yeah.
They beat an Illinois team, Joe, that was ranked at the time that they played them. They win that football game. Look, I think Penn State is Penn State. Like, I do. I think Drew Allar's been, Joe, so much better. He looks more confident. And I know that he had 3 picks last week. He did not look good. But at the same time, he's throwing the ball with conviction. Last year, he did not throw the ball with any conviction. For that and that alone, I like them. I think that the real only challenge that they have is going to be against Ohio State later in the season. I know that game's at home for them. But can that running game continue to be good? Can they get a little bit healthier? And if they do, maybe they can make a run here. But, Joe, they're going to be in the playoff. I mean, like, unless there's a total collapse, which I don't see happening, they're going to be in the playoff.
I agree with you on Allar, and I broke down his film against USC. I think that one thing that helps this team and what makes them so much better is that Andy Kotelnicki, the offensive coordinator, has done such a great job of alleviating pressure off of his shoulders. It felt like against Ohio State and Michigan last year, there was a ton of pressure on his shoulders for them to win. Like, he had to play a great game, and he didn't because he was so young and green to those situations. So when he plays bad, they're able to find other ways to win by getting creative, getting Tyler Warren the football. Man, like that kid was doing so many different crazy things in this game. He took a snap under center in a short yardage situation. He snapped the ball, which we talked about. They have the best tight end in the country, in my opinion, in Tyler Warren, who's a freak, underrated athlete. I think that
Penn State fans were in here yelling at us when we didn't have Tyler Warren in our top 5 tight ends coming into the season, too. They were mad.
Oh, wait. I could have sworn I had Tyler Warren in mine.
No.
I don't know about that one, brother. I'm pretty sure I had Tyler Warren.
You said that he was overrated and couldn't block.
Okay, you didn't. I know those words did not come out of my mouth. They absolutely did not. To get back to what I was saying, our tight end rankings in retrospect were terrible because we had Yurcek and I had Mitchell Evans in there, and oh my God, those guys haven't done anything. But what we were saying though here with this Penn State team, I think that the most that they can peak up to is 5. I don't think that they're going to cross further, and it comes down to in a big game against a team like Ohio State where scheme will help you, but doesn't ultimately win you the football game. I don't know. I still don't know if I can trust Drew Allar to not make mistakes. His accuracy sometimes is off. And then one of the other things that, like, when he's not in a one read situation, that's where the mistakes tend to show up. I think he's going to be a future NFL starter, but right now he's 2 years away from that and he's still figuring things out. He could be what holds them back when they play Ohio State.
Very fair. I don't disagree with that. I do love that he's throwing the ball with conviction, right? Yeah. And look, man, here's the truth. I think there's something to be said when you're playing one of the worst games of your season and you as a team find a way to come back. Look, man, James Franklin does not lose the games he's not supposed to. Very rarely does that happen. It's been the big boys that he's gone up against that he hasn't found ways to win. And that is who Penn State is. They're going to stand on business, and they're going to fight like hell to get one of those wins. But, Joe, I mean, again, they're a playoff caliber team. They can run the football effectively. I still like Kotelnicki. We talked about him. We talk about him so much. The creativity that he does and he uses is great. So we'll see. What other team you want to get to here? I know that we got Bama, Miami. We talked a lot about Miami this week. Little old Clemson's in there.
Little old, is that how we want to describe them?
I mean, that's how Dabo describes the little old Clemson.
You've got Bama at 6. I moved them down to 8. I mean, can we address the uneasiness for them?
Yeah, sure. Let's get to Bama. Yeah.
And you also, if you have Tennessee's in yours, Tennessee.
No, I don't.
Talk about both the.
No, I don't.
Oh, you're right. You didn't put Tennessee in there.
Yeah, I don't have Tennessee in there.
Ignore me. I think even if Bama beats Tennessee, that I'm not going to move them up any further. Look, the problems are that I have addressed on here. I think that Alabama still has the ceiling to be a top 5-4 team, win the SEC this year. Like it's still there. I just think it's such a long process that a lot of people don't really understand of building chemistry with a roster when you're a head coach and trying to get guys to like fully buy in, play fundamentally sound, disciplined football. They are going to be a few weeks away from like getting that figured out if they ever make those fixes. So I got to kind of put them on pause until they start playing cleaner football.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, man. I still think South Carolina, I say this every week because this is what we do. I understand that they lost to Vandy, and that's non-excusable. Okay, like I get it. I'm with you. But they struggle against South Carolina, and other teams have struggled against South Carolina. I mean, Joe, for what it's worth, so did LSU, and then in the second half, they physically dominated Ole Miss offensively. Jackson Dart was 2 of 8 in the second half with 50 yards passing. They could do nothing. Now, I get that South Carolina's offense is dookie. Their defense is not dookie at all. I mean, again, I feel like I'm going to repeat every single week about them. They found a way to win that football game. You know, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't nice. It's not the way that we have built Bama and the establishment of who they are because of who they've been with and who their head coach has been. But, man, yeah, I mean, you have them at 7. I have them at 6. Or you have them at 8.
No, I have them at 8. I moved them back further.
I don't. I mean, they got a lot that they have to fix, Joe. A lot that's got to be fixed. I don't know what to make of them as a team yet. I think that there are multiple. Like, did you see this thing this week about Brooks Austin and some other podcast getting into it? Just
yeah,
I'm not going to get into that. But like they were saying, y'all need to stop criticizing coaching. And listen, I'm not trying to be rude here, but Brooks isn't wrong. Like everything that he said,
of course, the guy's a former coach. Of course, a former coach is saying you need to stop criticizing coaching. It was so stupid of a thing, but
But
I understand sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was trying to get to here. My flaws with them or my issues with Bama is not necessarily all coming down to execution. A lot of it has come down to play calling and things that you've done on the defensive side of the football. I mean, Joe, to be real with you, Kalen DeBoer is going to have to learn to hand that rock off to Jam Miller if you're going to get getting 5 and 6 yards in the running game at Pop is what you've been doing. That's how you win this league, right? Like that's how you win it. You know who else had to struggle with that coming into the SEC too? I might add, because I was here and grew up watching him do it. Was Saban. Saban would get a quarterback, man. Him and Jimbo, they throw it 40 times in a game. You're like, what are we doing? Like, run the ball. He's going to have to learn to start handing that rock off to Justice Hayes and Jam Miller.
Yeah. No, I agree. They need to be making better decisions. There's just a lot of things that need to get corrected, and I think that they're worthy of being top 10. But multiple sloppy weeks in a row makes me feel uneasy about them, and I'm fearful that they're going to drop another one.